I will be the first to agree that housing is expensive. And there's no shortage of complaints, especially by the millennial generation and now the Zoomer generation. But the first thing they've got to realize is that things are much better than the picture they paint and the media paints. Here's why.
So it's a good place to be as an investor if you're, if you're looking to buy right now, or you're trying to figure out what's your advice to real estate investors or even homeowners? Like, should they wait? Should they buy? What should they do?
Well, for homeowners, is your question, should they sell their existing home and then buy a new one?
For example,
Yeah. Okay. So the dilemma they have is that the delta between the new mortgage rate they would get and their existing mortgage rate is so big that they're just not interested in selling.
yeah.
25% of the people in the country have a mortgage at or below 3%. 65% of the people in the country have a mortgage at or below 4%. And remember earlier, we talked about the housing stock being about 140 million people. Well, 42% of those have no mortgage at all. There is just so little motivation for people to give up their home and buy a new one that it's just constricting the market. And so we have a very unusual situation. We have a situation where people are more motivated to improve the existing home they have because now the world has realized that their mortgage, that super cheap mortgage, is a big asset. And they don't want to sell that mortgage asset because it cannot be replaced.
Now, what about people looking for housing, right? I mean, what we've seen on the multifamily side is that demand for rental housing is unprecedented because it's actually cheaper to rent and to buy. There's even, especially some young people, like, you know what? I'm never going to buy a house. That's dumb. That's stupid. And then I got to cut a lawn and look at all the hassle. And then who knows, son, I'll lose it. I'm just going to rent for the rest of my life. It's much more affordable. I don't have any worries. So someone who's looking for housing, there might be asking, well, should I rent or should I buy? If we're saying, hey, if interest rates are going to probably go down, maybe not a lot, but go down, therefore prices are going to go up. If I want to build equity or wealth, it seems to me like if one can afford it, one should buy a piece of real estate.
Yeah, look, I will be the first to agree that housing is expensive. And there's no shortage of complaints, especially by the millennial generation and now the Zoomer generation, the Gen Zers that are coming after the millennials. But the first thing they've got to realize is that things are much better than the picture they paint and the media paints. Here's why. The typical millennial that is the primary driver of the housing market right now. I mean, the oldest millennials are not kids anymore. These are 43-year-old people. Okay. They are definitely adults, even if they're refusing to grow up. Okay. What they're on the slow life plan. Okay. They're doing everything later. They are forming a household later. They are coupling up and getting married much later, if at all. They are having kids later. They're doing everything more slowly than their baby boomer parents did. So the narrative in the typical millennial's mind, and remember, this is the biggest demographic cohort in American history. So you got to talk about them. Okay. The baby boomers were only about 76 million Americans. Their children, the millennials, are 80 million. Okay. So it's a giant economic force. It matters for sure what the millennials are doing. But the millennials complain that they say, look, my parents, when they were 30 years old, they could afford a house. And I'm 30 years old and I can't afford a house. Okay. And so that's their gripe. But what they never look at is the fact that they went to Europe, they became a digital nomad, they sort of screwed around, they didn't get too serious about their career. They have been enjoying life and avocado toast. And, their parents didn't do that. And their parents coupled up sooner. Their parents got pregnant sooner. They had kids sooner. They did everything earlier. In fact, that gap in time is about 6 years. So the accurate comparison is to compare a 30-year-old baby boomer with a 36-year-old millennial. And when you do that, you find that they're really at about the same place economically. And the millennials need to stop complaining so much, okay? Because things are much better than they would have you believe. So that's an important thing to consider. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, affordability. I've heard people say that because of this affordability, it may actually cause a rental crash of some sort. Rents can't continue going up because people can't. But I'm thinking the same. How can that people need to live somewhere, so what are people going to do? Just not live anywhere anymore? But I understand the problem, right? It keeps going up, and I can't afford it. I can't afford it. But would rents ever go down because there's an affordability problem?
No. Look, the marketplace does not care about the affordability problem in buying or renting or anything else for that matter, or the price of hamburgers. I mean, the market is the market, okay? And the market dictates the price. And when someone pays a price for something, that determines the value, period. Okay. It doesn't care how unreasonable anybody thinks it is or how unaffordable it is or woe is me. The market doesn't care. Okay. The market just moves on and goes to the next person who's willing to pay. Look, another thing the economists really just don't understand is the idea of capitulation. Right now, for example, would it surprise you to learn? It probably would. It probably surprised everybody to learn. It surprised me when I started researching this. Would it surprise you to learn that the percentage of transactions right now of real estate transactions by first-time buyers is the highest it's been in many, many years? Over 58% of all homes sold right now are sold to first-time buyers. The same people who are complaining like crazy, right? Here's what people don't realize is that, look, everybody knows you would have been much better off buying a house 4 years ago. Heck, you would have been much better off buying a house in 1972, okay? But so what? At some point, everybody just capitulates. They take reality as it is. They'll complain about it. They'll pause because of it. They'll say, hey, we're going to try and time the market. We think there's going to be a housing crash because affordability is too low, prices are too high, interest is too high. But eventually, they just finally think, look, I want to get on with my life. I want to buy a house. Okay. And I'm not going to get the same house I would have been able to buy 4 years ago. It's just not as good. But I will eventually come to terms with the reality of the market, and I will capitulate and I will just buy what I can buy. And that's the way it is.
Yeah, I see developments like pad splits, for example, which I find fascinating. I think this is kind of response to what you're saying. The market, market doesn't care. So people are basically, they're bunking up with 5, 6, 7 other people, or 11. Their landlords are basically converting. Yeah, they're converting all livable space into a bedroom, right? So there's like 8, 9, 10 bedrooms in a house, and now the rents are much more affordable. And for the landlord, it's fantastic. It's like short-term rentals was to the normal house. All of a sudden, you're changing the use of a house. And I think it's fascinating. And as investors, we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we adapt? How do we take advantage of what's going on? And I think this is a great example of that.
Absolutely. No question about it. People just come to terms with the reality. I mean, look, it would be like this. Think of it this way. If someone is out there and they're thinking, okay, I live in Nebraska, right? Nebraska is not that expensive, right? Or I live in Kansas City, cheaper market, right? Or I live in Memphis, less expensive market. These are all places we've done business over the years. But by the way, my company, Empowered Investor, we help people buy properties nationwide for investment. Okay, they buy single family homes mostly for buy and hold long-term rental. And so we do business in all these different markets around the country. We see them firsthand. We know what the boots on the ground, real world experience is of landlords in these markets. But say, for example, someone's moving from an inexpensive market and they're going to move to Los Angeles, where I grew up, or they're going to move to New York City, right? Very expensive markets. They're going to accept less. That's the reality of it. You're not going to get the same home in New York City that you had in Memphis. In Memphis, you had a nice single family home with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a 2-car garage. And now you move to New York City, you'll be lucky if you get a 600 square feet efficiency unit. Okay. That's reality. So that same kind of scenario applies to the marketplace as a whole. You know, uh, 4 years ago, you had that big, nice suburban home. Now you're going to get a smaller, lesser home for the same monthly payment. That's just the way it is. And eventually people just come to terms with it.
It's been always fascinating catching up with you, Jason. How can people find out more about you and the Empowered Investor?
So my main website is just my name, jasonhartman.com, jasonhartman.com. And then you can find my podcast or YouTube channel out there. Just search my name on YouTube or any podcast platform.
Dude, enjoyed it. Great having you on the show today.
Thanks, Michael. It's always great talking to you, and happy investing to you and your listeners.